Hey and welcome back to Fanfic Reading. Today we are reading The Warmth That Changed It All by Raalm and ToxicExotic. I hope you enjoy.
Chapter 21, Knee Part 2. Weiss Schnee. The sound of bare feet slapping against cold tiles filled the room as Weiss paced back and forth in nothing but her nightgown. It was only a few minutes until Yang was supposed to arrive, but she hadn't heard anything from her girlfriend since their call that morning, though she had heard from Blake. Around lunch, the fauness had called to say that Yang hadn't shown up for her class and wasn't answering her scroll. To make matters worse, Weiss hadn't had any luck getting a hold of her either. She knew what the likely cause was, of course. Tai had said that Yang's mother was a touchy subject with the blonde, so for her to go silent after having likely just learned the woman was in town was understandable. But that didn't mean Weiss wasn't worried. Yang had never avoided her before. During their relationship and even when they were just friends, whenever Weiss had called, Yang had picked up. No matter the time, no matter what she was doing, Yang never failed to make sure she was available, and it was only now that Weiss realized just how much she cherished that reliability. To know that someone was always there for her was like a blanket on a cold day. It made her feel safe and warm, but that blanket had been missing all day, and as such, she had felt the cold stronger than she had all winter. Feeling her scroll buzz in her hand, Weiss looked down and hit stop on the alarm that she had set to tell her when it was finally time. She knew Klein had placed the key outside the gate and trusted that he would call the guard away. The only thing now was for Yang to show up, though Weiss would understand if she ended the night in bed alone. Watching as the minutes passed, Weiss let out a small sigh. She had waited all day, but now that the moment of truth was so close, Weiss was nervous. If Yang had come then, she would surely be in the garden at that very moment, and should be on the balcony in only a minute or two more, as the gate wasn't too far away. However, what if she was caught? What would happen then? Weiss knew what would happen. She would have to confess everything to stop Yang from facing trespassing charges. Why had she given in to her desire? Why had she acted so rashly when there was so much at stake? As she thought on everything that could go wrong, Weiss continued to watch the minutes tick by. However, the minutes that passed quickly became more than Yang should have taken, and Weiss felt the panic inside her begin to rise. She was taking too long. If she had indeed come, she mused. Ah! The light knock on her balcony door pulled Weiss from her spiraling thoughts, with a small yelp as she span around to see Yang's form silhouetted against the darkness. Relief immediately flooded through her as she rushed towards the girl, who was gently sliding the door open, cold air pushing its way through the thin material of her nightgown as she threw her arms around her girlfriend. Sorry I took so long. Yang shivered slightly, and Weiss felt a pair of strong arms wrap around her, the feelings of warmth and safety returning fast enough to push out the encroaching shivers from the cold air. Had to dive behind a rosebush to not be seen. It is fine. Weiss breathed and tightened her grip on the blonde's waist. I am just relieved you were not caught. Please. Yang chuckled lightly as she removed an arm from around Weiss' shoulders and moved it behind her to close the door. You don't spend years hanging out with a girl obsessed with ninjas without learning some things. Smiling softly, Weiss reluctantly pulled away from her girlfriend and took a proper look. She was once again wearing the tan jacket she had worn during their date to the museum, its two flaps of fabric hanging down over a plain pair of black pants. A small rucksack was strapped to her back, and little specks of white snow rested on the girl's shoulder, likely the cause of her slight shivering, but other than that she looked okay. I was still worried, Weiss said quietly as she took her girlfriend's hand, leading her further into the room while holding out her own for Yang's bag. I know. Yang smiled and gladly followed, passing it over so that Weiss could place it next to her bed out of sight of her door, just in case someone did stop by. But I'm here now. Weiss felt a sudden tug on her arm, the force dragging it around and back into Yang's arms, her face coming up to see Yang's grin. But she knew Yang, knew those eyes, and that smile as she had spent more than enough time staring at her boisterous girlfriend to know when the energy was not the same, and at that moment, there was definitely something off. You are? Weiss smiled in return, not sure how to broach the subject. Deciding a simple leading question was the best approach, Weiss tentatively pressed forward. So how was your day? Not. Yang began but cut herself off with a small sigh, her smile dropping as her eyes locked on to Weiss. Blake snitched, didn't she? Caught off guard, Weiss looked away slightly. Figures. Yang said with a slight shake of her head. There was no frustration, but there was definitely some reluctance. She was worried. Weiss countered and returned her gaze. So was I. You were avoiding our calls. I know. Yang sighed and let her arm drop, sitting down on a chair near Weiss' desk. I just needed some time alone so I could think about some things. Toying with the hem of her nightgown, Weiss sat down on the edge of her bed. Letting her voice take on a more gentle tone, Weiss carefully pressed a little. Do you want to talk about it? Looking down at her boots while she thought about it, Yang took a while to reply. Not wanting to rush her, Weiss watched as Yang's shoulders slumped, another small sigh escaping her as she gave a short nod. I do, Yang replied and stood up slowly to make her way over to the bed. Just not yet. I want to relax with you for a little bit before I get into it. Please? Okay. Weiss smiled gently and picked up her scroll that she had discarded when she had ran at Yang. So have you eaten? I can have Klein bring you something up. I've eaten. Yang smiled in return and sat down on the bed next to her, her hand stroking across the covers. So this is the legendary bed? You are joking about the size. Yes, well, the price was no joke either. Weiss grinned, placing the device onto her bedside table. The blonde hummed and laid back with a pleasured groan. How much would one of these run me? A little more than I am guessing you would be willing to spend, she replied and laid back with her girlfriend after hitting send. As she did, she was met with a raised eyebrow. I believe the price was close to 50,000 lean. A little more, Yang replied incredulously, clearly not expecting the number to be so high. I won't have made that much by the time I'm 30. Weiss chuckled slightly at her girlfriend's reaction. It was once again proof that Yang didn't care about her status, and even regularly forgot about it altogether. You keep forgetting that my family is one of the richest in the world, Yang. Weiss chuckled and reached out to slip her fingers through her girlfriend's. I like that. Yeah, well, there's so many more interesting things about you. Yang smiled in response and turned to her side. Though 50,000 lean is so much more comfortable than I thought it would be. I prefer yours, Weiss replied honestly and turned her head to look at Yang, the blonde smiling face filling her vision. Even though she could see the smile was not entirely happy, she would still maintain that it was one of the most beautiful sights she had ever seen. Except my pillows, they are far superior to yours. Well then, Yang replied and moved a little closer, her bright lilac eyes glowing mischievously. Maybe I should steal one and keep it in mine. You know, for if you sleep over again. When? Weiss corrected the girl with a smile and felt her chest hitch a little, as she felt Yang's gentle breathing on her cheek. When I stay again. A small smile pulled at the boxer's lips, and Weiss closed her eyes, as she felt Yang press them against hers in a tender kiss that made Weiss' heart skip a beat. It was the type of kiss that had no sexual heat behind it, no hidden desires, only love. Pure, unfettered love. However, after a couple of seconds, Weiss felt Yang's breath shudder sadly as she backed off. Opening her eyes, she saw in Yang something close to what she had only seen in him once before. Hey! Weiss breathed softly and ran a thumb over the back of Yang's hand as she tightened her grip on it in an attempt to reassure her. Talk to me! Weiss was close enough to hear Yang swallow loudly, her jaw moving back and forth as she contemplated what to say. Tai had clearly not been wrong when he had said that Yang's mother was a tough subject, as the silence between them stretched on for at least a minute or two before Yang finally took a deep breath and exhaled. On my 13th birthday, she said quietly, the pain of the memory she was about to tell evident in her voice. A woman showed up for my party. I didn't know who she was or why she was there, but she looked like me. Dad said she was a family member, so I just accepted it and went on with my day. But halfway through I heard shouting from the kitchen. Ruby was upset by it, so I went to see what was happening. I remember walking in, seeing my dad and Crow arguing with the woman, and I was about to tell them to shut up, that they were scaring Ruby, but then the woman shouted that she shouted that she was my mother. Yang paused and shook her head, her nose turning up into a sneer as her brow furrowed. When she next spoke, her words were shaky. I didn't believe it at first, she continued. But the way Dad shouted back, saying that she had forfeited that right when she had left me on his doorstep. After I heard that, Not wanting to push Yang to continue, Weiss simply continued to stroke the back of Yang's hand. I lost my temper, I guess. I remember throwing the plate I was holding, shouting for the woman to leave. That I already had a mom and lost her, that I didn't need another who hadn't cared about me my whole life. What did she say? Weiss asked carefully. Nothing, Yang replied with a slight shake of her head. She just gave me this look. I still don't know what it was, and then she left. I haven't heard a word from her since. Until today? Yeah. Yang mumbled and dug into her pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. Dad told me today that she moved to Vale a month ago and wants to see me. Even gave me the number she's using. Said he didn't like it, but the choice was mine, not his. Looking down, Weiss saw Yang holding the folded paper between her thumb and middle finger, using her index finger to slowly spin it round. Looking back up, Weiss could see the conflict in her girlfriend's eyes, and she was sure she knew where that conflict was coming from. I am guessing you want to see her? She asked gently, receiving an almost imperceptible nod in return. I do, Yang whispered quietly. I know I shouldn't, but a part of me has always regretted not hearing her out. So what is stopping you now? Though the girl wasn't crying, Weiss heard her give a small sniffle. Summer, Yang replied slowly. She raised me. I wasn't even her daughter yet. She showed me so much love anyway. But if I give Raven a chance, and if I eventually forgive her, would it just be the same as throwing all of that love back in Summer's face? And what if Ruby sees it as a betrayal of Mom's memory? Yang, Weiss shook her head and raised a hand to cup her girlfriend's cheek. I am pretty sure your sister and your mother would understand. Just because you want to try and get to know your birth mother, it does not mean you are tarnishing the memories you have of Summer. It's not just that. Yang sighed and rolled onto her back, Weiss raising to her side to mimic the position Yang had just moved from. Summer has always been something that connects me and Ruby more than anything else. Mom died when Ruby was 5, but she's still in every part of her life. Everything I did to raise her was inspired by what I remember Summer doing for me. When she thinks of Mom, she can take everything I've done to make that image stronger. Even Christmas, we've always had a tradition of watching old tapes of Mom. Just me and Ruby in her room. Those tapes she loves so much are what got her so interested in old electronics. When our old tape player broke, she scoured everywhere for another one, and now she makes sure that none of those things that let her see a glimpse of her mom go unloved. And you think you will lose that relationship? Weiss asked despite already knowing the answer, receiving a stronger nod than her last question had earned. She knew just how much Ruby meant to Yang, and was therefore able to understand why it was so difficult for her. So talk to her about it first. She loves you, Yang, and I highly doubt you are going to stop any of those traditions just because you give Raven a chance. I know, Yang said defeatedly and raised a hand to run it through her hair, letting out a frustrated growl. I just hate this. Why does everything in my life have to get so complicated? At Yang's words, Weiss couldn't help but feel a little guilty herself. Much like Tai had been, Weiss was still hiding something from Yang, something that really needed to be said, but she still had no idea how to tell her. I know the feeling. Weiss sighed and rested her head on her girlfriend's chest. I am sorry for the complications I bring, though. That's not what I meant. Yang sighed in return, and Weiss felt a hand begin to rub lightly along her back. Our situation is tough, but how I feel about you is one of the least complicated things in my life right now. I feel the same, Weiss replied. However, a dirty feeling rose within her as she said it, and knowing what caused it, Weiss knew she had to come clean. Yang? Yeah? I know this really is not the right time. Weiss breathed and reached up to place her hand on Yang's midsection. But there is something that I need to tell you too. Since you said it like that, I'm guessing it's something I'm not going to like? Yang groaned, the noise making Weiss cringe a little as she gave a slight nod. Well, may as well get all the bad news done in one day. Just means the others had better be really good. Taking a deep breath, Weiss prepared for the worst as she finally told Yang the truth. Do you remember when I told you I might lose the company for a while? But that I would also get it back? Yes. Well, there is something my father could do, Weiss admitted and felt Yang's hand slow its gentle stroking of her back. And if I refuse, then it is almost guaranteed that I will never get the company back. And what is that? There is a small chance he could order me to go back to Atlas headquarters and continue my work there. As she felt Yang's hand stop on her back, Weiss also felt her heart rate pick up as worry quickly began to set in. She already knew Yang wasn't okay with her putting her claim to the company at risk, but to have admitted that she may have to either lose it altogether or leave Vale made that sense of security that had slowly begun to return begin to fade again. How could you leave that out, Weiss? The blonde sighed after what felt like an eternity. You were going through so much at the time, Weiss breathed, her heart racing as she heard the disappointment in her girlfriend's voice. And with how you reacted just to the possibility of it, I was worried you would think we were not worth that risk. You still should have told me, Yang countered quickly in a steady voice. We can't be making plans to do something as big as telling your father about us if I don't know everything that will happen. I know, Weiss breathed sadly, a pang of pain shooting through her at having added to Yang's terrible day. Laying there waiting for Yang's response, Weiss shifted her weight around due to the discomfort of the blonde's silence. The last time Yang had shown any disappointment in her had been after her treatment of Mrs. Peach during their date, so to hear it again made her dig her head a little deeper into the blonde in hopes that Yang wouldn't push her away. Can he even send you away? Yang replied after a minute, her tone even and unreadable. You're 18. As his daughter, no, Weiss admitted and tightened her grip on the stomach of Yang's jacket. But as the heiress, he could use it as a test to see if I am truly dedicated to the company. If I refuse, he will see it as me choosing you over the company and have reason to take away my position. Silence followed Weiss' explanation, a silence that felt far too long for her liking, but she waited it out. What she had just revealed was surely something. Then you go to Atlas, Yang finally said, her voice sounding firm. I don't like it, but if that's what it'll take to show him you're dedicated, then that's what you have to do. But what about us? She asked quietly, though the feel of Yang's hand renewing its stroking was comforting once again. You said that you do not do well with long distance. That is why you and Arslan BR. Arslan was never this, Yang interrupted softly. She was never someone I could turn to like I turned to you today. But I know you are risking something that means so much to you, and I don't want to make that harder, so if I have to deal with long distance for a while, then so be it, because you are not giving up your company for someone like me. Please do not talk like that, Yang, Weiss replied quickly, unable to keep the slight amount of annoyance from her tone as she looked up at her girlfriend. Do not ever talk like you are not good enough. Sorry, the blonde sighed and looked down to meet her gaze. It's just, I know what your grandfather's company means to you, and I don't want you to even consider giving that up for a registered ex-White Fang member who failed half her high school classes. Yang, Weiss said, and shook her head as her girlfriend's repeated self-deprecating. That is your past. We have all made mistakes, but if you honestly believe you are not the kind of person I could give up the company for, then you clearly are not looking at yourself properly. I do not care that you have failed classes, and your time in the White Fang means nothing to me. What I care about is that you are kind, and caring, and funny, and so much more. You have spent your whole life taking responsibility for things that were way beyond what should have been placed on you, and I can say with absolute certainty that if I were to give up my company for anyone, there is no one that would be more worthy than you. That might be how you feel, but I'm still not going to let you give such a massive thing. That I want, Weiss breathed and then wrapped her arm around Yang's waist. But please never tell me you are not worth it, because you are. Good, Yang replied, an air of defeat in her voice. I will miss you if you have to go, though. Looking up to meet her girlfriend's eye, Weiss gently pressed her lips against Yang's in a reassuring kiss before pulling back and gazing lovingly into the girl's eyes. You know that if he does send me to Atlas, I will be buying you a plane ticket whenever you want one, right? I know. Yang smiled sadly, and Weiss felt the hand stroking her back reach up to run the finger through her loose hair. But I will ask a lot. I hope so. Weiss smiled and lowered her head to give her girlfriend a quick peck on the lips. Weiss smiled down at her girlfriend. Once again, Yang had proved that all of her worries weren't as big as she thought they were, and that feeling of warmth that Weiss felt whenever looking into her beautiful lilac orbs began to rush its way through her body, her heart rate picking up its pace again, but in a good way. Yang? Yang hummed quietly. Heat rushed to Weiss' face, causing a reddish blush to paint itself over her cheeks. She had known for a while now, but the moment had never felt right. However, in the wake of her prior confession, Yang had just proved how strong their relationship was, and Weiss could think of no better time. Weiss paused to think on how best to say it. I know it's been just over 2 months, and you don't have to say it back, But I need you to know that I love you. Yang's eyes widened slightly, and Weiss immediately felt stupid. It was definitely too soon, she thought to herself as she looked away and pulled back slightly, only to be stopped by an arm that quickly wrapped itself around her waist. Nervous as to what she would see, Weiss looked back down at Yang to see that the blonde was happily smiling. You Dawn! I love you too! It was Weiss' turn for her eye to widen slightly at Yang's words as she felt the already strong wave of heat intensify. She had been sure that despite her own acceptance, it had been too soon, but Weiss knew Yang wouldn't say it in return simply to make her feel better. Unable to fully articulate just how happy she was, Weiss once again pressed her lips against Yang's. A surge of happiness rushed through her as she immediately felt Yang return the gentle affection, and in that moment, the mere fact that Yang had been able to say those words in return meant more to her than anything she had experienced in her 18 years. Her own words having failed her, Weiss pressed in a little to show exactly how much it meant and felt Yang's arm tighten around her waist, the comfort of the situation growing by the second. Crawling up a little higher, so that she was no longer stretching her neck, Weiss continued to deepen the kiss she was sharing with her girlfriend. As she did, she reached her hand up to grip the zip that rested around her midsection and pulled it down, the tan jacket quickly falling open. However, as she rested a hand on Yang's still clothed stomach, a small knock sounded from her door. Weiss jumped at the sound and pulled away as leapt up from her bed, pointing silently for Yang to hide down the other side out of sight of the doorway. As she strode over to the door, she focused on correcting her breathing, not wanting whoever it was to have any reason to suspect something. With a final deep breath, she pulled it open only to be met with the kind and smiling face of one of her favorite people in the world. Good evening, Klein. Weiss breathed out with no small amount of relief upon seeing the portly butler. Good evening, Miss Schnee. The man smiled happily and held up a tray with a teapot and cup resting on top of it. I bought you your evening tea. Oh, yes. Weiss nodded and moved aside to let the small man into the room. Just on the desk, please, Klein. Of course, he said with a nod and entered the room, carefully placing the tray where Weiss had told him and turning around to rock back and forth on his heels as he reached into his blazer pocket and pulled out another small cup. Would you be needing this spare cup? With a small smile, Weiss gave the man a nod and pushed the door behind her closed. Yang, Weiss called quietly as the door clicked shut, instantly seeing her girlfriend's head poke up from the side of the bed. I would like you to meet the man who has served my family since before I was born. Standing up from her crouched position, her jacket now missing, Yang gave the man a smile and held out her hand. Klein Zeben, he said in a jolly voice as he gently took Yang's offered hand and shook it. Yang Xiaolong. Yang smiled nervously in return. It's nice to meet you. The please is all mine, Miss Xiaolong, Klein replied as he dropped the girl's hand and swooped into a deep bow. It is so nice to meet the woman who has been making our little snowflake so happy as of late. Oh, Yang chuckled and ran a hand through her hair. Not had someone bow to me before, but you're welcome. She makes me happy too. Weiss felt her heart beat a little faster, and her face glowed a bright red as Yang flashed her a loving smile. It looks very much like you make each other happy. The portly man chuckled in response and placed the cup onto the tray. However, I highly doubt you want this old man ruining your precious time, so I will take my leave. Please enjoy your stay, Miss Xiaolong. I already am, Yang replied while the man walked towards the door and pulled it open. As Klein shut the door behind him, Weiss watched Yang turn to look at her, the blonde's eyebrows raised in amusement as a smirk spread across her face. I think he likes me. That is because he is a good judge of character. Weiss smiled and locked the door before she sat back on the side of her bed. Ah, Yang replied and swooped down to place a small kiss on her as she picked up her bag. But I need to get changed. The bathroom is right there. Weiss blushed at the smile Yang was giving her as she pointed to the door near her desk. Your room has a bathroom? Rich family, remember? Weiss laughed and kissed her girlfriend again before the girl could stand back up properly. We have a butler just for cake, so yes, my bedroom has a bathroom. Now you're just showing off. Yang grinned as she made her way towards the aforementioned door, pushing it open and peeking inside. Be back in a minute. Smiling to herself, Weiss quickly set her alarm for early the next morning and pulled back the covers of her giant bed and slept beneath them. Fortunately, since her bed really was so large that they could both lay in there through the night and barely touch, she knew that Yang would be more than willing to cuddle. Shifting nervously while she waited for Yang to finish getting ready, Weiss remembered what had happened last time they had shared a bed. If she was honest with herself, when they had first arranged the stayover, she had expected things to happen, for moves to be made and steps to be taken. But with everything that Yang was facing, she now doubted that anything of the sort would progress that way. "Did you miss me?" she heard Yang say, and saw the blonde smiling face pop around the doorway. "I would have, but I was comfortable in bed," Weiss replied smugly, and pulled one side of the covers open. "Though if you were to join me, it would mean I could enjoy both of you." Yang hummed cheerfully and jumped up onto the bed, now wearing the same yellow t-shirt and shorts she had been when Weiss had spent the night at her house. "I like the idea of you enjoying me." "I bet you do," Weiss replied and rolled her eyes as her girlfriend slipped beneath the open cover and shuffled closer, throwing the sheet back over them both so that she could feel the heat emanating from Yang immediately began to warm the trapped air. "But I just enjoy being near you." "Oh, really?" The blonde chuckled, and Weiss felt an arm wrap around her waist to pull her closer to her girlfriend's warm body. "Is this close enough for you?" "Even this," Weiss replied and moved a little closer to actually press against Yang, the warmth of the girl's body immediately passing through the thin fabric of her nightgown. "It's not close enough. You know there are ways to be closer?" Yang said killingly and bit her lips effectively, a hand raising to press just gently against her cheek. Weiss gazed into the lilac eyes of the girl she loved and pressed her lips softly against Yang's, a feeling of love rushing through her immediately as the girl turned it lightly. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe Yang still interested. Pulling back, Weiss gave the blonde a caring smile. "Is that what you want?" she breathed, her hand finding its own way to Yang's hip. "Because I am not going anywhere tonight." Apparently taking a second to think, Weiss saw temptation flicker through Yang's eyes. However, after a few moments had passed, Yang shook her head and pressed her forehead carefully against Weiss' own. "Not tonight. I did this morning," Yang admitted quietly. "I kinda thought you might have asked me over for th." "I did," Weiss admitted slowly. "At least, I did while we were making the plans." "Oh." Yang sighed, and Weiss felt the girl's arm around her waist tighten a little. "Guess that's another thing that got screwed up today then." "Not at all," she quickly whispered in return and placed another gentle, fleeting kiss on her girlfriend's lips. "I know you are going through stuff right now, but you have waited months for me to be ready. I can easily wait an extra week or two until you are." "Thanks." Yang smiled as her eyes fluttered a little. "For being there for me. I was feeling so lost today, and I had no idea what I was going to do, but as I tried to work through things somehow, I was guided back to you." "By what?" Weiss asked cautiously, her voice gentle in an attempt to not pressure her. "My mom," Yang answered nervously with an uncertain smile. "I know, it sounds stupid, but I went to her grave and talked to her. Ruby says it always helps, so I thought it was worth a shot, and when I asked her what to do." Yang paused, the uncertainty fading from her smile. "It started to snow, and I knew it was her way of reminding me that I should be taking to you." "That does not sound stupid at all, Yang." Weiss smiled sweetly after taking a second to process what she had just been told. "But I am glad your mother seems to like me. She would have loved you." Yang nodded and leant in for a kiss that was breathtaking in its chillness before pulling back all too soon. "I know I do. You know I am never going to tire of hearing you tell me that." Weiss smiled and felt a wave of happiness surge through her as Yang's thumb stroked her cheek. "I hope not, because I intend to make sure you know it for the rest of your life." Yang breathed slowly, returning the smile without any hint of sadness. "I can live with that." She chuckled happily at the amazing future she knew was ahead of her. "And I know I said it earlier, but I love you too." Seeing the grin that spread itself across her girlfriend's face, Weiss was convinced that even if her father were to burst through the door unannounced, she would still have pressed her lips against the blonde's, happiness rushing through her as she simply laid there and reveled in what couldn't have ended as a more perfect night for her. Chapter 22, The Tour. Yang Xiaolong. Taking a deep breath as she stirred, Yang inhaled the beautiful flowery scent of the girl in her arms. She had been enjoying a pleasant dream about her, and Weiss sitting in the green fields of Beacon, at least what her brain remembered Beacon to look like from her tour 2 years ago. While they had sat there, her arms wrapped around a studying Weiss, who had been sat between her legs. People had passed by giving them jealous looks, each one making her feel happier than the last, as it was her who got to openly show her love for the white-haired beauty. However, as she had been about to nuzzle her chin softly into the girl's slender neck, a slight shifting in the real world had woke her. Though what she had awoken to was just as great. Shifting ever so gently in Yang's arms was the beautiful girl from her dream, doing her best to not wake her, as she clearly tried to escape. Grinning slightly, as she felt a small hand close tenderly on hers, and attempt to remove it from its place on Weiss' stomach, Yang kept her arm from budging a single millimeter. Apparently thinking it was just Yang's natural strength, the beauty carefully applied more pressure, but Yang simply wrapped her arm around tighter around her, and pulled the girl back in to close the tiny space that had been created. "No," she breathed softly, a childish smile etching itself onto her face as she heard Weiss give a happy sigh. "I heard my scroll vibrate," Weiss replied quietly, and made another half-hearted attempt to move away, only to be stopped once again. "But you're warm." "No." The girl chuckled lightly, and made to shift again, though not away from her, but to turn around. "You are warm." "Exactly." Yang smiled, as a beautiful pair of pale blue eyes came into view. "I'm keeping you warm. With the size of this bed, you'll freeze to death before you get back to me." "You are such a dolt." Weiss laughed softly, and Yang felt an arm slide around her own waist. "It will take 5 seconds at most. People can die from cold shock in seconds." She countered and moved her hand up to gently stroke through the girl's silky hair. With a shake of her head, Weiss leant in and buried her face just below Yang's chin, and a wave of happiness surged through her. The day before had been so miserable, with having learned her mother was in town and being worried about her relationship with Ruby, but to wake up with the girl she loved wrapped comfortably in her arms made her happier than ever. "You do know I have to get my scroll, right?" Weiss sighed jokingly, and pulled back slightly to look her in the eye again. "Fee," she groaned, fainting annoyance with a roll of her eyes. "But there's a leaving fee." Loosening her grip slightly, she teasingly pushed out her lips and closed her eyes, earning a small chuckle from her girlfriend. However, before even a second had passed, Yang felt Weiss' lips press gently against her own. As she happily received payment for letting Weiss go, the girl slowly untangled herself from their cuddle and moved away, finally breaking the kiss and leaving Yang alone in the massive bed. No longer having anything to hold on to, Yang let out a yawn as she stretched her tired limbs. Weiss' bed was exceptionally soft, and sleeping on it had been like sleeping on a cloud. But even still, with Weiss no longer by her side, it felt significantly less comfortable. However, true to her word, Weiss returned seconds later, and Yang slipped her arm under the girl as she nestled her back against Yang's chest. "So?" Yang yawned again and pulled her closer, resting her chin on Weiss' shoulder. "Was it at least worth leaving me alone?" "Idiot!" Weiss giggled and tapped the screen, the sudden bright blue light making them both flinch. "Nothing will ever be worth that." "MMM." Yang hummed happily and pressed her lips against her girlfriend's neck, earning a pleasant groan in return. "So who is it?" Weiss said hesitantly, causing Yang to look up from her tender affections. "It is a message from Winter." "Oh," Yang explained, feeling herself seize up slightly. Good news?" "Very." Weiss nodded and held the scroll up so that Yang could see the message that was displayed on screen. "Weiss, as promised, I have spoken to General Ironwood and he has granted me my leave. I shall be arriving next Monday and staying over the holidays. However, I do wish to remind you once more that there is a lot you do not know and a lot that you will not like. So, again, ask that you think on whether this relationship is something you truly are serious about. Winter." Reading the message over twice, Yang couldn't help but feel a small amount of nerves run through her. From the second half of the message, it seemed like Winter was already against their relationship. She could only imagine what would happen when Weiss told the woman about her past. "Seems like she already doesn't like me." Yang groaned and rested her chin back on Weiss' warm shoulder. "She is always like that," Weiss replied quietly as she closed the device, but there was something not quite right about her tone, like she was confused about something. "So why do you sound worried?" "It is not," the ivory-haired girl replied and once again turned around to face Yang. "I just thought I knew everything about Winter, but apparently I was wrong because I have no idea what she is talking about here." With everything going on, Yang could certainly understand how Weiss had felt. The day she had found out that she had a mother she'd never known had certainly been troubling for her, though it had mainly stemmed from the fact that everything she'd known had been turned upside down. "I'm sure it's just something she's never had a reason to talk about," Yang said quietly in an attempt to make sure Weiss didn't worry. "I know." Weiss sighed and shuffled a little closer, one of the girl's legs slipping between Yang's own. "I have a strong feeling that it is about my father, though." "Well," Yang smiled and wrapped an arm over her girlfriend. "If it is, then we'll deal with it together." Yang watched a slight grin overtake Weiss' face, caused her eyes to glint as she leant in and gently pressed their lips together, the action sending yet another wave of happiness through her. Using her arm that was trapped under the girl, Yang pulled her into a tighter hug to further enjoy the feel of having the ability to hold such a person so close. "MMM," she hummed contentedly as their lips parted. "What was that one for?" "For being you." Weiss grinned and rested a hand on Yang's hip. "For always reminding me that not everything is as bad as it seems." "Well, that's what I do best." Yang chuckled and teasingly ran a finger down Weiss' back. "For anyone but myself, that is." "Well, that is what you have me for now." Weiss smiled and pecked her on the lips again. "However, I do need to shower since breakfast will be starting soon." "You know, I could join you?" she asked and let a mischievous smile pull at her face. "For the shower or for breakfast?" Weiss chuckled lightly, and Yang felt a hand close on her waist. "Pretty sure I'd be willing to join you for both." She hummed in return and reopened her scroll. "Well, it is Saturday, so father and Whiteley should have left for the office already." "What about your mother?" "One moment," Weiss replied and began to type on her scroll before pressing it against her ear. "Good morning, Klein. Have father and Whiteley left yet?" The faint voice of the tiny man she had met the night before sounded from the other side of the device, and a slight amount of relief passed across her girlfriend's eyes. "And what about mother?" Once again, the muffled voice sounded, and a smile etched itself onto Weiss' face. "Thank you, Klein." Weiss smiled and gave Yang a small nod. "In an hour, can you please call a staff meeting in the West Wing? Father mentioned that it was looking a little dusty." "I doubt he used those words," Yang interrupted with a smile and received a gently push on her hip. "Yes, thank you, Klein," Weiss said as she closed the scroll and snaked her hand around Yang's waist. "Well, father and Whitley have left, and Klein said he believes mother has a meeting in town, so if you want to join me for breakfast and have a tour of the house, you can." "That." Yang grinned and rolled onto her back, her arms tightening around Weiss and bringing the laughing girl to a rest on top of her. "Seems like something I want quite a lot." "Good." Weiss laughed and leant down to press their lips together lightly for a few seconds. "Great." Yang smiled and ran her fingers through the white hair that was falling around them. "So with that sorted, where did we land on the shower?" A cheeky smile wrote itself across the beautiful face above her as she sat up on her knees and looked down on her, the covers falling back and exposing them to the cold air. With the pale girl sat on top of her, framed by the pale light shining through the window, Yang was once again convinced that the person she was gazing upon was in fact an angel. "Well?" She smiled as her hand fiddled with the hem of Yang's shirt. "I am going into the shower alone, but as I made clear last night, the choice is yours as to whether I stay alone." Yang hummed thoughtfully. The temptation was there to join the girl, but she knew it would likely lead to more, and Yang didn't want their first time together to be like that. "I think you should shower alone today." "Okay," Weiss replied with a gentle smile and slowly climbed off of the bed. "I won't take long. I'll miss you anyway." "You can shower after if you want then," she replied with a quick roll of her eyes and placed a small kiss on her as she turned to leave for the bathroom, leaving Yang alone. "Ugh!" Yang groaned as she laid back on the bed once Weiss had closed the door. "Stupid," Yang sighed inwardly. Normally, she would never refuse to shower with anyone she was dating if given the chance, so to refuse and remain in the bed while her girlfriend was showering only meters away with free rein for Yang to join her was frustrating to say the least. She had been so ready yesterday when she had assumed that Weiss was calling her over for that, but with everything happening, with all the worry about Raven and Summer and Ruby, Yang had found herself caught in a similar situation as Weiss had been. Weiss had been clear that she had been holding off due to not wanting Yang to feel unappreciated, but now Yang was holding up because she didn't want Weiss to think she was just trying to take her mind off of something, because as little as sex normally meant to her, she wanted the first time with Weiss to be special. She wanted them to both be ready and prepared, to not have any doubt about the other's intentions, and while shower sex was exciting, it wasn't how she imagined it being. She wanted it to be perfect. Giving a large sigh as she thought on how she would accomplish that, Yang ran her hand through her hair and sat up to get her clothes ready so she could shower after Weiss. Weiss' house was huge. Hell, huge was an understatement. Yang had only seen half of it as they made their way to what the ivory-haired girl had called the music wing, but she was already sure that her house could fit inside Weiss' mansion 10 times over with room to spare. So far she had seen most of the upstairs, which had turned out to be mainly bedrooms, but as they had made their way downstairs the rooms had become far more varied, from bars to an indoor pool, even a movie theater that they had only poked their head into since Klein had chosen that room to hold a staff meeting. However, Yang had noted that Weiss had seemed genuinely impassive towards all of them. She had been shocked at first, because who on Remnant couldn't love the fact that they had a movie theater in their house, but as they explored more and more room, it started to become clearer as to why. With each new room she saw, she had begun to notice just how empty they seemed despite their rich design. They all seemed cold and unused, like they were simply there for show. None of the rooms were there because the family needed them, or because they enjoyed what that room had to offer, but because it showed they were rich. It only took until the 4th bar for Yang to realize exactly why Weiss didn't care about them. The cold, pristine nature of each room was representative of how she was raised. As if image was everything, that the only thing that mattered was how people perceived you. They spoke of absence of family and loneliness. As such, the rooms had quickly begun to lose their charms. Even the entryway, that Yang hadn't seen the prior night due to sneaking in through Weiss' balcony, was a spectacle. It looked more like something one would see in the entrance to a museum, and while Yang could admire the artwork and the statues, there was no feel of family there, nothing that made you feel like you were walking into a family home. "So what's this room?" Yang asked as she rested a hand on the handle of a door that Weiss had walked past, trying her best to sound excited. "Oh," Weiss said in surprise as she turned around and gave Yang a smile. "That's the wind room." "You have a room full of wind?" Yang grinned in jest, hoping that her stupid joke would at least make the smile on her girlfriend's face more genuine. "Rich people really are weird." "You know you are an idiot, right?" Weiss replied as she gently shook her, though the smile on her face did indeed become a genuine one. "I meant that the room is for wind instruments." "Oh," Yang hummed facetiously and gave a quick nod. "Yeah, that makes more sense. You want to see inside?" "Nah." Yang smiled and pushed herself off of the door to continue their walk down the hallway. "Seems like you want to show me something." It was true. As soon as they had entered the music hall, Yang had noticed that Weiss had slightly increased her speed and was particularly favoring the left side of the hall. "Maybe," she nodded and turned to walk beside her. Giving her girlfriend a small shoulder bump as they walked, Yang felt an arm hook itself through hers, and taking a quick look behind them to see that no one was around them, she shifted her arm upwards and let her fingers entwine with Weiss. "I like this," Yang admitted, feeling herself breathe a little sigh of relief. "My house?" "No." Yang laughed and held out their hands slightly as she gripped it a little tighter. "I mean this. Holding your hand as we walk through your house." "Oh," Weiss exclaimed and tightened her own grip with a smile. "I do too." "I would hope so," Yang replied with a sidelong grin at the girl. "So what are you so eager to show me?" "My favorite room, beside my bedroom of course," Weiss answered and slowed her pace. "We are here anyway." Coming to a stop in front of a plain white door, Yang watched as Weiss placed a hand on the handle and gave her a small look before pushing it open. For reasons unknown to her, the room seemed far brighter than the hallway where they were stood, and in the middle stood a large, white grand piano made of what looked to be marble. It could have been because Weiss actually seemed to like the room, or just because there was something more loved about it, but the room seemed much warmer than any she had seen in the house. Feeling a slight tug on her hand, Yang allowed her girlfriend to pull her into the room, shutting the door before letting her guide her towards the huge contraption. As they arrived, Weiss pulled out a small bench from underneath and sat down while tapping the seat next to her. "Come sit down." "MMM," Yang hummed with a smile as she took a seat next to the snowy-haired girl. "I know you studied music, but you never told me you could play the piano?" "I studied a little while I was growing up. Weiss shrugged and reached out to gently glide her fingers across keys, the resulting sound rather pleasant to Yang's ears. But I started again recently. How much is a little? Yang asked, knowing that what Weiss called a little was often a lot. As if in response, Weiss raised her other hand and effortlessly played a melody that immediately made the room shine a little brighter. Yang wasn't the most musically inclined, but even she could tell that what was being played was far more complex than someone who had only studied a little. And if the smile on Weiss' face was any indication, the tune she was playing was a happy one. Wow! Yang breathed as Weiss let her fingers stop their movements and turned to smile at her. You call that a little? Okay. Weiss chuckled and turned back as she pressed down lightly again, her fingers tinkling out a quiet melody. There may have been days where I refused to leave the room. Well, you were really good. Yang grinned and gave the girl a small bump. How come you never told me? I just... Weiss said and paused, her smile falling slightly. I stopped playing for a while. How come? Once again, Weiss took a short pause, but after a couple of moments of beautiful music, she took a deep breath. Have you ever had something you loved more than anything just make you sadder than you could ever imagine? Weiss asked, and Yang gave a slight nod. I used to love playing, but eventually I just stopped hearing what I wanted. As Weiss talked, even Yang in her limited knowledge of music could tell that the girl's playing had taken on a more somber tone. Every time I played, I just felt myself start to crumble. Like every bad thing in my life would be reverberating around me, everything I hated would ring in my ears. It eventually just got to the point where I could not bear to hear it anymore. Yang could understand. While she loved Ruby more than anything in the world, there had been a short amount of time after finding out about Raven where she had completely neglected her, as every time she saw the girl, who looked like the woman she had called Mom, she was reminded of just how much of a lie her life had been. Her father had originally never even wanted her, her birth mother had left her on a doorstep, and the only woman who had provided her strength was gone. It had taken Blake's constant pestering and Ruby freaking out about getting diagnosed with autism for Yang to realize just how much she still loved the girl, but eventually she had sorted herself out and stopped avoiding her. So what made you start again? You? The word was little more than a gentle whisper, but immediately the somberness that had begun to darken the music quickly became lighter. Last week I found myself drawn to this room, and as sat down and started to play again, you were the only thing I could think of, and for the first time in years, I could play what I wanted again. Feeling a heat rise in her chest, Yang gave a small smile to the girl and let a hand wrap lightly around her waist. To hear Weiss saying that she had returned something she loved back to her life made her feel better than she could have ever though possible. Well, I am glad I got you to play again. Yang grinned and placed a quick kiss on his girlfriend's cheek. Because you are really good. I know. Weiss smiled coyly and picked up the pace of her playing a little. I never realized how just much I did miss it. Ah. Yang cooed and hugged her a little tighter. So what does this one do? Reaching out a finger, Yang rested it against one of the black keys and gently pressed down, the sharp sound cutting through Weiss' beautiful music and making her flinch. Seeing Weiss smile and gently shake her head, Yang pressed down on a few more and earned a laugh from her girlfriend. You are such a child. She laughed and once again slowed her pace. Here. Continuing a more gentle melody, Weiss slipped a hand under Yang's, her finger lining up directly underneath her own, and slowly replaced it back where her own had been. Relax your hand and fingers. Eyeing the girl suspiciously, Yang removed as much control from her hand as possible, and slowly felt her fingers begin to rise and fall in a steady rhythm. It was nowhere near as graceful as her girlfriend had been playing before, but feeling Weiss' fingerwork under her own was enough to pull an awed smile from her. You're incredible. Yang breathed and shifted her hand to the side, the music interrupting harshly as Weiss' finger slipped between her own. I was taught by the best. Weiss smiled and let her other hand continue the melody. For a while at least. Holding her girlfriend's hand gently, Yang sat there for a couple of moments just listening to the girl play. Even one-handed, the melody was beautifully light and uplifting, like she was channeling her happiness into the notes themselves. So? Weiss asked, her voice gentle and cautious as it not trying to upset her. Have you decided what you are going to do? Abuti Ruby and Raven. Yeah. Yang answered slowly with a nod. While she had held Weiss' sleeping form the night before, she had thought for a while on the subject. For some reason, her mind had been clearer while holding the girl, and there had only been one thing that made sense to her. I'm gonna talk to Ruby soon. I want to see Raven, but my sister comes first, so if Ruby isn't cool with it, then that's that. Do you really think she will say no? I don't think so. Yang smiled and stroked her thumb along the back of the hand she was holding. But Ruby is the most important thing to me. If there's even the slightest chance that she isn't going to be okay with it, then I have to make sure. I understand that. Weiss nodded and tightened her fingers around Yang's. So what about you and your sister? Yang asked with a smile. You two are pretty close. You gotta be excited about her coming, right? I am, sort of. Weiss hummed happily as she played. Nervous excitement would be a more apt description. Really? Yang asked in surprise. Every time Weiss had mentioned Winter, she had always mentioned just how much she adored the woman. How come? Well, Winter and Father don't really get along. Weiss explained slowly and let her fingers fall away from the piano keys. I love having her around, but Father is always far more irritable during her visits. Sounds like a rough deal. Yang hummed, receiving a nod in return. It's worth it to see Winter again. Weiss smiled and leaned gently against Yang's shoulder. And to finally get some help with our situation. I guess, she replied hesitantly, unable to stop the small amount of worry that arose within her. Weiss. I read the story about Winter and the White Fang in Atlas after the attack. Yang admitted nervously and felt Weiss' breath out heavily. I know it's hypocritical since I just said I have to tell Ruby my thing, but is there any chance we can just not tell your sister about my past? You are still worried she will hate you. Pretty much come to terms with the fact your family will hate me. She sighed and shook her head. More worried your sister will shoot me than anything. A small shaking against her shoulder was her reply as Weiss quietly giggled to herself, though they quickly ended and Weiss' voice came back full of reassurance. She won't shoot you, Yang, Weiss said, a small amount of humor tinting the reassuring tone. And no, we do not have to tell her, but once she knows your name, she will look you up and discover I was arrested for White Fang activity multiple times and am still registered. Weiss hummed in confirmation. But she's not unreasonable, Yang. She knows people change, just like I do. I hope so. She sighed and gripped a little tighter on her girlfriend's hip. Sorry, I kinda killed the mood a little there, huh? It is fine. Weiss smiled and leaned up to give her a quick peck on the lips. However, breakfast will be ready by now, so we should get going. Food sounds perfect right about now. Yang smiled in return and stood up, helping Weiss to her feet as she went only to pull her close. Just like you. Save the buttering up for your toast. Weiss grinned and allowed herself to be pulled into Yang's arms. And just so you know, even if Winter does not like you, it is not going to stop me from loving you, okay? I know. Yang smiled and leant down to place a kiss on her girlfriend as her heart gave a small flutter. I love you too. Good. Weiss smiled genuinely and pulled back as the two of them walked towards the door. Now let us go get something to eat. That's weird, Yang thought to herself as she watched her girlfriend pull the slightly ajar door open. I could have sworn I shut it.
And that's all for today. Thanks for coming by and hanging out. I hope to see you next time.